She was born in Puerto Rico and cherishes her roots and life lessons learned from her family. She graduated magna cum laude from the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez, as I did about 5 years later. Well, actually before. I say before. In fact, we're not the only university presidents, by the way, who attended Mayagüez. Dr. Javier Ceballos, president of Kutztown University in Pennsylvania, graduated from El Recinto, we call it that, the campus, about a year before I did. So that's pretty, what Ed and I always say, 3 presidents within a 6-year period of time out of Mayagüez is pretty impressive, so we think it is. After receiving her master's in Spanish and her doctorate in humanities from the University of Texas at Arlington, Dr. Cruzado began her rapid rise to the ranks, through the ranks of academia. In 1999, she was named the Dean of College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez, and in 2003, she became the provost at New Mexico State University, later serving also as EVP for academics and interim president. She was appointed the 12th president at Montana State University in January of 2010. In July 2011, she and I both attended the Harvard Seminar for New Presidents, but at that time of the seminar, she'd already been in her job 18 months, and had made huge strides in many areas of her university. She had launched a $10 million campaign for a seat renovation at the stadium. She had engaged the community by increasing communication with her weekly Monday morning memo, and lots of other initiatives. And so, when we were there, she obviously had much more experience than most of us who were just new presidents. The strategic priorities for Montana State University are almost a mirror image, really, of those that will be required at Georgia Regents University to become the next comprehensive research institution we know it can be. It has worked on increasing its graduation rates. It has elevated its research excellence and recognition of the faculty. It's worked to strategically increase its service outreach and engagement, and it's really working to educate more students while maintaining the quality of programs. President Cruzado is a leader, an educator, and a visionary, and a friend of this university and the university that it will become. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Cruzado as the Presidential Lecture Series and for her presentation, The People's University, the Transformational Power of Higher Education.
Good afternoon.
You may need a pointer, do you?
No, I don't need a pointer. I did not bring a PowerPoint. I did not need a pointer because I'm here just to tell a story. I came in the storytelling hour today. First of all, thank you for taking the time today at noontime to be here. I'm absolutely honored with your presence and with the opportunity to come to Augusta. What a beautiful city, but what a spectacular university. You really, truly are blessed. So good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to join you at the President Series. And I especially want to thank my friend and colleague, President Ricardo Assis, for the invitation, and to the wonderful team and the colleagues from this institution, some of whom I have met between yesterday and today. I am very impressed by your dedication. And thanks again for taking the time from your very busy schedules, and I think I see some students as well. That is fantastic. So that we can engage in a conversation about the importance of the concept of public higher education in America, what I call, or what it's being known as, the People's University. So as I said today, I don't have a PowerPoint. I don't have slides, because I want to tell you a story that for me, it's very inspirational. It's not a personal story. It's the story of our nation. So I will do several things today. I will give you some historical background. I will talk about the importance of having big picture ideas and the courage to implement them, and how all that results in transformation. I will also ask some questions from you so that you don't ask them from me. And my hope is that towards the end we engage in a good, fruitful dialogue. In case you detect an accent, as Ricardo said, it comes from Puerto Rico, where I was born and raised in the city that is home to the land-grant university, the only land-grant university in the Caribbean, and the only land-grant university in a Spanish-speaking country, the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez. This institution is a source of a profound sense of pride. Since the turn of the 20th century, it has prepared the scientists, the engineers, and the professionals that have transformed the economic landscape of the Caribbean basin forever. Therefore, it should be easy to understand why, as a child, I always aspired to attend this land-grant university. And in case you don't know it, he has been extremely modest about it. But one of the most recognized and valued faculty members at University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez was Dr. Asis's mother, Dr. Juana Baumgartner. So perhaps like some of you, I was the first person in my family to attend college. Just a show of hands, how many of you are the first people in your family to go to college? Turn back, take a look, okay? There are still a lot. And like in your case, if you were to meet my parents today, you would find them to be fairly intelligent and talented. Yet the advantages of a college education had eluded them. So what was it that enabled me to explore a career path that was totally different from that of my merchant father and my homemaker mother? If it was not intelligence, if it was not talents, what was it? Well, the answer is very simple. Someone gave me an opportunity to go to college. Therefore, like all of you here, I am determined to make sure that no other young man like my father or no talented woman like my mother is ever deprived of the wonders of a college education, because it truly transforms lives. How? If you were to tell me just 20 years ago that I was going to be living in Montana as a university president of a land-grant public research institution, I would have looked at you with very puzzled eyes, right? As you know well, I think, let me give you some information in case you don't have it. Puerto Rico is a tiny island in the Caribbean. The total area is 100 miles by 35 miles. Yet, we have 4 million people living in the island. Compare that to Montana, the fourth largest state in the Union. You know, by my back-of-the-envelope type of calculations, the area of Puerto Rico fits 42 times in Montana, 42 times. And yet, we don't have 1 million people living in Montana. Last May, I was invited to serve as the keynote speaker at a rural 8th grade graduation ceremony. 2 years ago, in a different school, I had a similar opportunity to address the graduating class, all 24 of them. This last year, the occasion required the combination of 3 rural schools to reach the celebratory quorum for the happy graduates, all 11 of them. At the end of the ceremony, and I want to share this with you, at the end of the ceremony, while enjoying cake and ice cream with members of the graduating class and their families, there was this boy whom just had finished 2nd grade, and he approached me. There he was, with his wild blonde hair, wearing long pants that were already too short for his growing legs. And after a good conversation with him, when the time came for me to say, well, I should go home, this farm boy, still enjoying his cup of ice cream, looked at me with his bright blue eyes and said, I hope you have a wonderful life. Well, have I had a wonderful life? Thanks to public education. And I share these anecdotes with you not only to place myself in context, but also because I am convinced that I owe a great deal to the public university. As a proud alumna and servant of the land-grant mission, I remind myself, and you know this well, our citizens hold very high expectations about what our particular brand of universities can, should, and must bring to their lives today and to the generations that will inherit the land. This last July, and this is where the historical part comes, we celebrated the 150th anniversary of the establishment of the Land Grant Act. And I would like to share with you some historical facts that speak to deep convictions, perseverance, and deft political negotiations in the passage of this transformational piece of legislation. I think that this will illuminate the rest of our conversation. And the story starts like this. In 1857, a US congressman from the state of Vermont by the name of Justin Maurice Smith proposed legislation that called for the government to grant tracts of land, the sale of which would generate an endowment to be used in building at least one college and university in each state of the Union for the purpose of educating the sons and daughters of the industrial or the working families of America. The leading object of these colleges would be, and the piece of legislation reads, to teach such branches of learning as are related to agriculture and the mechanic arts, read engineering, without excluding other scientific and classical studies. End of quote. Section 4 of the founding bill concluded beautifully, stating that this new type of institutions would promote the liberal and practical education of the students in the several pursuits and professions of life. I think that for a congressional bill that it's quite poetic. The irony, my dear friends, is that Morrill, born in 1810 to a blacksmith, while brilliant and determined, he never finished secondary school. In a recent article in the Burlington Free Press, Tim Johnson narrates, Morrill wanted to go to college, but his father told him that the family could not afford to send all, with the result that none of them went. Sounds familiar? Yet, with no formal education at the age of 15, Morrill managed to amass a large enough fortune as a businessman that he retired at age 38 and went into politics. Before someone concludes here that this is another example of the futility of a college education, it is important to note that Morrill always deplored not having a college degree. There's a beautiful quote when he was 80 years old, and he wrote, "To obtain the little education I have has cost me many evenings, Sundays after church, and scraps of time that could be devoted to it, involving far more labor than it would have been necessitated if I could have been sent to proper institutions of learning." Morrill would go on to be one of the longest-serving congressmen in the nation's history, working in Congress for 44 years, 12 in the House and 31 in the Senate, up to the point of his death when he was 88 years old. In mid-18th century, higher education in America, as you know very well, had more in common with medieval Europe than with the rapidly industrializing and expanding bustle that was our country. It is well known that the ivory tower welcomed primarily men of means, the clergy, and wealthy people of leisure. Much of higher education at that time was private, expensive, and focused on the classics, law, medicine, and theology. At the same time, there was a crisis looming for the young American nation because of the lack of readily available education for the people. In a way, the impetus, this is fascinating, the impetus for higher education, if you want to know the truth, came from hunger, from famine. In our beginnings, we were a hungry nation. In his 1858 appeal, Congressman Morrill noted that despite the nation's great wealth of land, it had imported $100 million of agricultural goods the previous year. That New England wheat and potato production had each dropped by 50% or more from 1840 to 1850. What was the cause? That American farmers did not know how to farm. The land was being exhausted, soil was eroding, and crop yields were plummeting. And to compound the situation even further, it was common for American companies and the government to import engineers and technicians from Europe to build bridges, factories, railroads, and any number of complicated public works. There was little to no place in America to train our own engineers or scientists. Therefore, it should not come to a surprise that our ignorance at the time stood as an obstacle to the benefits of science, to the benefits of technology, and to those of engineering. There are a number of often quoted passages about opposition to a new technology in the early 1800s. A simple thing known as the gas lamp. Let me read you a few. This is what people thought of this technology entering their lives. This is how we welcome change. Here's a quote. "Artificial lighting is an attempt to interfere with the divine plan of the world, which called for dark during the nighttime." Here's another one. "Lighted streets will incline people to remain outdoors, thus leading to increase of ailments by colds." And the last one, perhaps my favorite, "The fear of darkness will vanish, and drunkenness and depravity increase." America, my dear friends, needed education to help itself, to feed itself, to build itself, to steer away from superstition, and through the powerful transformation of public higher education, to empower the people. Thomas Jefferson had already anticipated the need of publicly funded education as a vehicle to protect democracy in America. In a letter to a friend, he wrote, "Let us, in education, dream of an aristocracy of achievement, rising of a democracy of opportunity. Preach, my dear sir," he said, "a crusade against ignorance. Establish and improve the law for educating the common people. Let our countrymen know that the people alone can protect us against these evils, and that the tax which will be paid for this purpose is not more than the thousandth of what will be paid if we leave people in ignorance." That was true then, it is true today. So, in 1857, Morrill made his first proposal to Congress for the establishment of land-grant colleges and universities. In it, he placed such a high value of an educating citizenry that one of the first draft versions proposed that tuition was going to be free. Maurice's proposal, of course, was a controversial one. As Peter McGraw has asserted, we should make no mistake. This was a radical, populist concept. Providing higher education for the working classes was not universally accepted. So 5 years would go by before the bill was signed into law. The first time, the House defeated it. The year after, the bill passed the House, 105 votes to 100, only to be defeated by the Senate. Another session brought with it renewed animosity, and members of the Senate attacked the Morrill bill mercilessly. It was called, and I have more quotes here for you that I think you will enjoy. It was called one of the most monstrous, iniquitous, and dangerous measures which have ever been submitted to Congress. Sounds familiar? Another quote. One of the most extraordinary engines of mischief. And yet, an unconstitutional robbing of the Treasury for the purpose of bribing the states. Sounds so familiar. The Morrill bill finally passed the Senate by 3 votes. And a week later, President James Buchanan vetoed it, arguing its constitutionality. The bill was finally approved July the 2nd, 1862, when Abraham Lincoln signed it into law. The Morrill Land Grant Act saw the light of day in America's darkest hour, the Civil War. But for me, and this is why it's so relevant for me today, it was a powerful lesson of transformational leadership, because it meant that rather than being constrained by the circumstances of the time, those elected officials envisioned a better and brighter future by educating the sons and daughters of the working families of America. See, they were not operating here. They were operating 150 years later. Of course, the year of 1862 gave us some pieces of congressional legislation of paramount impact. It was the year that saw the Homestead Act, approved in the month of May, and the Pacific Railroad Act, which was signed the day before the Morrill Act. But while the Homestead Act and the Railroad Act afforded us with, if you want, horizontal and geographical mobility, it was the Land Grant Act that gave us vertical and social mobility that would strengthen and characterize American democracy. That is why we are known as the people's universities, because we were built in the people's interest. The passage of the Morrill Act in 1862 did not end just in Morrill's work. When he saw the initial funding was not going to be enough to ensure the survival of land grants, he presented 7 more bills to help aid colleges and universities. His bills were killed 12 times until 1890. Talk about being persistent. And then in 1890, the second Morrill Act was passed, which gave a boost of funding to states with land-grant universities and established institutions which gave unprecedented access to higher education to African-American students. And it even received new life over 100 years later when the passage of the Land Grant Act of 1994, which gave inclusion to more than 30 Native American tribal colleges. The Morrill Act has come to be viewed as one of the 100 milestone documents by the National Archives. In this exalted company are the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation, and the Civil Rights Act. When we read the Morrill Act, we hear echoes of our Declaration of Independence. As a new nation, first we wanted freedom. As a young country, we secured education. Together, these 2 pillars would protect each other. We would be free to educate and be educated, and education, in turn, would make us free. So today, as we celebrate this remarkable achievement and the fact that it provoked more public institutions to be established around the nation, like this wonderful school, let's ask ourselves some pressing questions. I need to ask, first, are we still responsive to an access and excellence model? In our quest for excellence, and sometimes for national rankings prepared by the very same folks that sometimes deride a college education, in our quest, we should not forget our commitment to inclusiveness. The founding of land-grant and public universities was not limited to regions where the educational system was established and mature, or where students would be better prepared for college education. Let me ask you, how many of our original homesteaders do you think were college ready? The fundamental principle of the Moral Act was not to exclude the ones who perhaps would fail, but rather to invite everyone to succeed. But I still hear it all the time. College is not for everyone. Many of you still remember the way and manner in which, as timid freshmen, we were cordially welcomed by a presidential address opening with, "Look to your left, look to your right. Those individuals will not graduate." Did you hear that before? And by the way, did you notice that it was always the poor souls that were to your left and to your right that were the ones that were not going to graduate? Please do not misunderstand me. It is important to recruit great students who graduate at the top of their class. Of course it is. They enrich our universities in more ways than just intellectually. But if we, as public institutions, subscribe to an exclusive model in which we only recruit the best and the brightest, a conveyor belt model in which the outcomes are exactly in direct proportion to the inputs, rather than an engine in which an internal combustion creates amazing energy, when did we forget the transformation proposition of our universities? What happened to that? Every day, in everything we do, public and land-grant universities challenge the odds. And we confirm the equation that access and excellence are not two mutually exclusive terms. Our mission is to provide access, not to restrict entry, in the words of Robert Sternberg, adding that we should be particularly focused on value added, producing the future leaders who make the world a better place. Which brings us to another pressing question, that of retention and graduation, core elements of our performance as institutions of higher education. Let's face it, the fact that we lose almost a third of our students in their first year, and that slightly less than half graduate after 6 years, is simply unacceptable. We can and must improve educational attainment without sacrificing quality or compromising standards. We can give our students the tools to be successful by rethinking course content and pedagogy in terms of how they learn, which, if you have not noticed, my friends, is very different from the structures and strictures from when we learn. And being of a single mind and heart in our goals of advancing their progress towards degree completion. The corollary question is about the future of our publicly funded status. As state legislatures continue to walk away from the pact that made us a great nation. As this happened, student loan debts and the resulting loan default rates are out of control. What are we doing to avoid disaster in this furious race on a road to nowhere? And what is our growth model for research? What are we doing with the research that literally fed this nation and the world? What is the future of the medical research that has saved millions of lives around the globe? What is our plan as federal resources for competitive funding for research continue to dwindle? Have we developed the tactics and strategies, the partnerships and alliances for the future? And what about service? That part of our mission that allows us to connect with the communities who look up to us for solutions and hope in the future. The question is, if outreach and service programs are partnering with us in our scholarly endeavors, let me ask you, do we hold those in the same esteem as our academic and research endeavors? Do we value them and reward them in a manner that is consistent with our aspirations as engaged public universities? As you can tell, there are many questions in my heart today, which brings me to the story of the 8th grade graduation ceremony and my little farm boy. Would you believe that I was kindly advised not to talk about the prospect of college to these kids, for fear that they might not be admitted, or concerned that their parents would be made too self-conscious about their inability to pay for a college education? Since you kind of know me by now, you know exactly what I did. So my last question to you is, do you think that boy and others should have the same right that you and I have enjoyed? And will there be a place for him in the public university of tomorrow? Let me answer that question by looking to the past for inspiration once again. Let me share you very briefly the story of a remarkable man from Montana. Maurice Rolf Helaman was an American microbiologist who specialized in vaccinology. He was born in 1919 on a farm near Miles City, Montana. His parents were Anna and Gustav Helaman, and he was their 8th child. His twin sister, Anna, died when he was born, and his mother died 2 days later. Little Maurice was raised in the nearby household of his uncle and worked in his youth on the family farm, which was very important, because he credited much of his success and his interest in vaccines to his work with chickens as a farm boy. As you know, chicken eggs are used to develop vaccines based on weakened viruses. And due to lack of money, Maurice almost failed to attend college, like Justin Morrow. But his eldest brother interceded, and thanks to a scholarship, Helaman graduated in 1941 as first in his class from Montana State University. He won a fellowship to the University of Chicago and received his doctoral degree in microbiology. Helaman went on to work in the pharmaceutical industry, where he developed over 36 vaccines, more than any other scientist. Of the 14 vaccines routinely recommended, Helaman developed 8. Those for measles, mumps, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, chickenpox, meningitis, pneumonia, and Haemophilus influenza bacteria. Helaman is credited with saving more lives than any other scientist of the 20th century. This Montana country boy was elected as a member of the U.S. National Academy of Science, the Institute of Medicine, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the American Philosophical Society. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan presented him with the National Medal of Science, the nation's highest honor for scientific enterprise. Helaman received the Prince Pahidol Award from the King of Thailand for the advancement of public health, as well as a special Lifetime Achievement Award from the World Health Organization. the Mary Woodard Lasker Award for Public Service, and the Sabin Gold Medal and Lifetime Achievement Awards before he died in 2005. Robert Gallo, co-discoverer of the AIDS virus, has said, "If I had to name a person who has done more for the benefit of human health with less recognition than anyone else, it would be Maurice Helaman. Maurice should be recognized as the most successful vaccinologist in history." So today, just as yesterday, public and land-grant universities hold the promise for a better and brighter future by educating the sons and daughters of the working families of America. There is no doubt. And of course, there will be challenges. One of our first students at Montana State University, Thomas McKee, described the financial dilemmas that have been part of our history. He said, "The college came to Bozeman in that springtime of 1893 in true biblical fashion, carrying neither purse nor script nor shoes. It needed money to get started and couldn't get money until it did start." Sounds familiar too. But today, let's stand firm in our commitment to celebrating the legacy we have inherited, the moral act and the powerful public university system it announced. And as we go back, you and I, to our respective engines of mischief, let's assert our unequivocally and renewed efforts to the preservation and expansion of this extraordinary feat in American history. I salute all of you for your dedication, and I wish you success as you continue to advance the distinctive teaching, research, and service of this great university. Actually, I think what I'm saying is, I hope you have a wonderful life. Thank you. I think we have a few minutes for questions or comments, gossip or complaints. President Aziz, yeah.
So the question is, as we move to a larger consolidated research university, the question of access versus research university has come up, you know, and the balance of how can you maintain access. And of course, access speaks to not only providing access to individuals in the community who are prepared to go to college, but also to individuals who do not meet the standards for college admission at all. So when people speak of access, it's the two things, and I'd like you to see if you can distinguish the unprepared student who is not yet prepared for college admission and who can't actually meet standard admissions versus the individual who is but is not yet ready for a larger university. Mm-hmm. The second one has to do with the difference between access and success. You know, we have issues regarding lots of individuals getting admitted and then very few of them getting out. And so the question is, of course, there's value to education in and of itself without a degree, but I'd like you to comment a little bit about that part, and as you do so, speak perhaps about the value of certificates and associate degrees versus bachelor's, et cetera.
Well, let's see if I remember all. Because this goes exactly to the core of some of the very important conversations that we're having at Montana State University. And I think that one of the most important things that we need to do is engage in these conversations, because we tend immediately to default to what I call our binary opposition modality of thinking, which is predicated on something like this. Do you like chocolate or vanilla? It's impossible for you to like both, right? It's more complicated when you talk about institutions that have a tripartite mission, like teaching and research and service. Let me explain what we're doing at Montana State. Of course, at the beginning, we only devoted ourselves to teaching. So about 3 decades ago, there was a university president that said, we are excellent in teaching. I think that now we should devote ourselves to become an extraordinary institution in research. And the history is very well documented. They almost found his body hanging from a tree because of fear. People were convinced that it was about chocolate or vanilla, that we needed to choose between excellent in teaching or excellent in research. And the history is fantastic now. Go take a look at Montana State University. 25 years later, we have extraordinary faculty members who win all sorts of awards at the national, regional, and world level, if you will. We just have a faculty member that went to Everest. But we are attracting $110 million in research funds. Competitive. These are not earmarks funds. So we can do both. How do we do it? We integrated students in research. The undergraduate research program is very, very powerful at Montana State University. Actually, we reformulated the general education in what is now known as Core 2.0, and that means that every student that graduates from Montana State University has a hands-on experience in the lab, in the field. That student needs to be exposed to direct access to research. You accomplish both. So now enter the new president. And what do I hear? Do I hear that our students are ready for that next frontier of the next challenge? That for our students it's not enough to learn, to earn a degree. They want to make a difference. I'm sure that the students of Georgia are exactly the same. And there was an inspirational story last year when there's a project that it's known as Engineers Without Borders. There are several chapters around the nation. In the case of the one for Montana State University, what it's remarkable is that they are not only engineering majors. You have nursing students, accountants, philosophy students, and all of them go during the summer months to Kenya to work on a project that started 7 years ago when they wanted to build a water well to provide fresh, potable water to a rural school in Kenya. So what started with one well, now they have built 62 wells. And in the process, they have raised all the money to build those wells, over $500,000. So when you take a look at the before and after, what happened in that community, when girls were not going to school, because by the way, guess who needed to walk for miles with pails to come and bring water to the community? It was the girls, right? And now take a look at the photographs. They are beautiful. You have the boy cranking the well and the girl helping. So I can look at you in the eye and tell you that the students from Montana State University are literally transforming the world. But it didn't stop there. High school students from Helena were inspired by that story and raised $10,000 for a quality water project in one of our Native American tribes. That's the kind of students that we're receiving now in our classroom. They want to make a difference. So I said, okay, the third element of our tripartite mission is service. So now that we have learned to do teaching with excellence, and we added the second ball of research with excellence, let's add the third component. And of course, what was the first reaction? That's impossible. Where's that tree where they hang right? So that's where we are going, and there has to be a way in which we integrate those three components, which take us then to the question about access. And that is something that really disturbs me, because in our discourse, in so many universities, and I'm guilty of that, of being very elitist. Of course I wanted to have intelligent students in my classroom, until there was one day in which I noticed that if I only taught the intelligent, what was I doing? What difference was I making? What opportunity or chance was I giving to that late bloomer because there are so many of them who did not have the necessary circumstances and conditions when they were growing up, but they have the intelligence. And if they have the discipline, boy, those circumstances can be addressed. I am not advocating. Sometimes when I speak about this, some faculty members, what they hear is that I'm advocating for watering down content. You know what? Absolutely not. I think when I was in the classroom, I pitched a very hard ball. But my best, the time when I felt very good was when I had failed a student after all attempts were made. And next time, next semester, even when there were 32 additional sections, that student will come back with me. Because you know what? Students want and deserve for us to have very high expectation. Take that bar very, very high. Now, give those students the tools to be successful. And those two things can be accomplished. And today, through technologies, through a combination of efforts, through simplifying what we do in the classroom, all that can be accomplished. And I know this was going to happen, that I was going to forget. The what? Success. Well, this is what we have found in Montana State. When the tone at the top communicates that graduation rates are going to be at the top of what we do, something starts to adjust. 2.5 years ago, when I arrived at Montana State University, the graduation rate, the 6-year graduation rate, even with a freshman ACT score, average freshman ACT score of 25.2, the average graduation rate was 42%. Today, 2.5 years later, is 51.8. Those are immense gains. I have not touched curricula, I have not touched syllabi, but golly, I have said these students have an opportunity to be successful. Variations that we have included, for example, organic chemistry. We used to have an 80% DF and I's ratio. We started teaching one more class, one more hour of contact with an instructor who will work with the students in their problems. Supplemental instruction, we call it. And you know what that has done? A complete reversal. Now it's 80% A's, B's, and C's. See, it doesn't have to be complicated. Technology can help. But it's just, sometimes it's adding one more test. Taking a look at when those tests are being given. All that. And that student that you, at the beginning, did not think that was going to be successful, you will be surprised. You know, we all have had them. The student that comes to the classroom with a star on the forehead, and you know that that student is going to go far. Our job is not only to focus on those, but to dig a little bit deeper, because every student can be successful. It takes a little bit more of attention. I know I forgot another part, but I cannot remember anymore. Yes. Just one question at a time, and so that I don't forget. At my age, I cannot manage that anymore.
This is election time, and this is a time when all politicians or wannabe politicians make all kinds of promises, but surprisingly little can be heard about research and the significance of research and innovation for the future of this country and how we compete and how effectively our new graduates will advance society. So how could we, obviously, I mean, they have their responsibility, but in academia, we have our responsibility. What could we do to change this situation and make it a higher priority for everyone?
That's an excellent question, and I wish I had the total answer, because I know that I would be in Congress rather than here. Yeah. But here's the, let me just start by acknowledging that state legislators have a very ungrateful task. And this also is true at the federal level. They have this $1, right, that comes from the tax, and they need to parcel that out and decide which part is going to K-12, how much is going to healthcare, and how much is going to the prison system. And when everything is spoken of, then we talk about the big picture, the research, the frontier of the new knowledge. And I think that we have done a dismal job at explaining to our constituents why research institutions make a difference in America. We haven't. They think that it's just that we love to be left on our own and in our labs and in our little offices and writing little stories for only 4 individuals in the world that can understand what we're trying to say. So I think that we need to do a better job at telling our story. There's a story that I love to tell, because it compares to Maurice Helaman's. And I don't know if you have heard, I'm trying to remember his name, Norman Borlaug. It's a beautiful story because Norman was a son of immigrants, born in Iowa, and the same thing. He did not qualify for admission at the University of Minnesota. He was rejected. But Minnesota came up with the idea of what was then known as the new college. So those students that did not have all the qualifications for admission would go to the new college first. And Norman found his way there. Norman became interested in agriculture, in plant pathology, graduated from University of Minnesota, continued and had his master's and his PhD from that institution, and eventually, through research, developed this new wheat variety, this dwarf disease-resistant type of wheat variety, which was revolutionary. He took that to Mexico, he took that to India, he took that to Pakistan. And that's why Norman Borlaug is known today as the father of the Green Revolution, and literally the man who fed the world. So this student, who was admitted by exception to University of Minnesota, ended up winning the Peace Prize in 1970. Admitted by exception, became an exceptional man. That's why we need to focus on access and excellence. And that's why we need to tell the story about why research is relevant today and why so many of the problems that we have in every aspect, in health, in economics, you name it, research is the only frontier. But we need to tell the story, involve more students, and let our constituents know. I think our time is up. Thank you so much for having me here.
Traditional, we have a plaque for you. Let me just read that. Deep appreciation to Waded Cruzado, President, Montana State University, for demonstrating outstanding accomplishment, excellence, and leadership in the field of education, and for our participation in the 2012-2013 Presidential Lecture Series.
That's
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.